Hi, I'm Peggy Oliveira. Welcome to Courageous Journeys. Thank you for joining me for this Q&A. Today's question comes from Herlinda. And Herlinda shared kind of her experience in therapy that left her feeling, well, not so good, and had a question about that. So she shared that her therapist had told her that when you are sexually abused by a father, that it creates more significant wounding versus being abused by somebody who is not your father, or even somebody who is maybe outside of your family. So therefore, if you're abused by somebody other than a father, then you shouldn't be as impacted by it. And obviously this left her feeling like there was something wrong with her, feeling confused, feeling a little hopeless. And so really asking the question, what do I do? What do I take from this? What does this mean for me and how I feel in my healing? So I first want to say that for anybody who has had an experience, particularly with a therapist, that has left you feeling that your story is being compared in a way that makes it seem less important, or left you feeling that the things that you're struggling with really you shouldn't be struggling with for whatever reason, I just want to say that I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you were left doubting yourself, questioning your struggle, your experience. And there's a lot that can happen in the communication aspect of it. And so I don't want to just blame therapists because sometimes things can be miscommunicated, misunderstood. But the reality is there are a lot of therapists, especially when they do not really understand what it means to be a childhood trauma survivor, who have ideas about things that are not necessarily completely accurate. But we can also sometimes hear things in a way that reinforce what we already believe or fear. So I want to say that, but the reality is what matters most, no matter what the intention of the therapist is how it leaves you feeling. What it reinforces for you in terms of what you believe about your experience or yourself. And so anytime that you are left questioning or doubting your experience or your struggle, ideally, you would be able to talk to your therapist about that. And I say ideally because it's not easy. It's challenging to allow yourself to feel comfortable enough to have that kind of conversation. I also say ideally because it's possible that you might bring something up to your therapist, and for any number of reasons, that therapist may not really understand what you're saying or expressing, or may feel a little defensive about it. But ideally, you would be able to talk to your therapist about it because oftentimes it is a miscommunication. So I want to say that. Unfortunately, the reality is that, as I said, there are a lot of professionals who do not really fully understand everything. And I want to make it clear, I'm not suggesting that I know everything either, and especially do not know everything around issues that I have not been practicing in for 20 years. Like if I were talking with somebody that had an addiction, there are things about addiction that I'm not an expert at and don't have a lot of experience in. If somebody were talking to me about parenting, I'm a parent. I've raised 2 children, but a parenting therapist is not something that I have expertise in. And so even though I might have some experience working with people that are parents and struggle with that, I certainly have experience being a parent. There are things that I could potentially get wrong if I'm working with somebody who is struggling with their parenting. So, so this isn't a criticism of therapists who get it wrong. It is important, though, to recognize, if you're on the receiving end of this, that therapists do sometimes get things wrong. And when they do, know that it's not your fault. I know that's easier said than done. And this is why I talk about, if there's ever something that a therapist says to you that leaves you feeling doubtful in some way, leaves you feeling bad in some way, it's important to talk to the therapist about it, because it is often misunderstanding or miscommunication. But if it's not addressed, it leaves you feeling like you can't trust the person, that you believe the person doesn't believe you or value you, or maybe judges you in some way. So I think that that is important. So now addressing the actual being told, or even just believing, even if you've never been told. But the idea that if it's a father, you're going to be more deeply wounded by that. So I've talked about this before, so if you've been following me for a while, I'm sure you've heard me talk about this. But one of the things about childhood sexual trauma, and really kind of sexual trauma even for adults, is that no matter what the actual experience is or who the perpetrator is, the long-term impact is often very, very similar. The kinds of things that we struggle with, the core beliefs that are developed as a result of that, are very much the same. So in terms of long-term impact and the wounding that happens from sexual trauma, childhood sexual trauma in particular, it's the same. Whether it's a father, a mother, a sibling, another family member, or a stranger. The long-term impact is the same, because the long-term impact is a result of the meaning you attach to the experience. And I've done other videos on this. I'm not going to get into all of that right here. But it's what you end up believing about who you are. It's the responsibility that you take on for it. It's the shame that you end up feeling about it that creates the unworthiness and the long-term impact. Having said that, if you are abused by somebody that you have a very close relationship with, it creates additional layers of healing that need to happen. So when you are sexually abused, or abused in general as a child, by a parent versus a stranger, the wounding has layers to it that you wouldn't have if it was a stranger. So with a parent, and this is true for either a mother or a father, and I would say that this is also true in almost every way if your primary caretaker is your abuser, but not a father or a mother. So like a lot of people are raised by a grandparent or an older sibling or an aunt or an uncle. So whoever your primary caretaker is, if that's the person that you have to rely on, that feeds you, clothes you, then it would be kind of the same for the most part. When your abuser is somebody that you have to rely on, somebody who is supposed to love you, protect you. There are layers of betrayal that are a part of that. And so there's additional aspects of wounding that need to be healed. Betrayal trauma is significant, and it's not that the sexual abuse itself is more impactful, but the fact that the person that you have to live with, that you have to rely on, the person who is supposed to love you unconditionally and protect you from bad things happening, that betrayal aspect of it creates layers that need to be healed. And so when you're healing, any of those additional layers are going to require additional aspects of healing, things to understand, practices to implement, ways of looking at it. For example, with a father, one of the pieces there, in addition to the fact that you're supposed to be able to trust this person, so you never really feel safe, right? So that's going to be a little different than the lack of safety that you feel from strangers. The wounding, the long-term impact is going to be quite similar, but the avenue for healing those layers may be a little bit different. And we have ideas about fathers, right? They're supposed to protect you. We also, if your abuser is a mother, we have ideas about mothers that add layers to the wounding and then therefore the healing. So again, the long-term impact is going to be very similar in almost every way, but the healing, there's going to be some different things that you need to be able to look at and heal. And part of that is because we have ideas about mothers. We have ideas about who mothers are supposed to be. And so if a mother is abusing you, then one way that you interpret that you internalize it and therefore take responsibility is, if my mother is doing this, then I must be really, really horrible. Because if my own mother can do this to me, if my own mother can hurt me, then what does that say about me? And of course, you believe that it says something horrific about you. And it doesn't, but that's what you end up believing. If it's a stranger, you end up still believing that you're horrible, that you're unworthy, that you're to blame. You feel shame around it. So all of those pieces are still going to be there, but there's the additional layers that you have to heal. So, and that can take longer because there's more layers of healing to work through. But it is so important for people to understand, no matter who your abuser is, you're going to be impacted by that. And the long-term impact, if you think of a spectrum of who the abuser can be, from a complete stranger to your parents, the long-term impact is very much the same, no matter who that abuser is. And I know that may seem like it doesn't make sense, but that's one of the things that I personally, in my own experience, recognized in my healing that I thought was so incredibly profound. And as I worked with clients earlier in my career, really recognizing that no matter who somebody's abuser was, whether it happened once or twice or throughout their entire lifetime into adulthood, the impact was still very much the same. They believed the same things about themselves. They felt the same type of shame. They struggled with the same trust issues, with the same boundary issues, the coping mechanisms, pretty much all the same. Of course, there's variances for everybody, but overall, the same. So if you have ever felt that your experience doesn't matter because it wasn't your father or your mother, or it was your neighbor and not your sibling, it isn't true. And we naturally compare our experiences to other people and somehow think that their experience is worse. But those people that you believe had a worse experience are comparing themselves to other people's experiences, and sometimes even an experience that's like yours. But there really isn't, in terms of the way that it impacts us, there really isn't much of a difference. And I want to be clear that I'm not minimizing the reality of what it means to be abused by somebody that you live with day in and day out and that you fear every single day of your life, even if it's not conscious. That is definitely difficult, and that certainly adds more to if it was a stranger one time. But again, it's about those layers. It's not about the way that you're impacted. So I hope that makes sense. I'd love to hear from you. Have you doubted yourself? Have you compared yourself and made yourself believe that you shouldn't struggle in the way that you do, even if your abuser was a close family member? Because we do tend to think that that's the worst thing. And in some ways, like if you want to look at it from a bigger picture, somebody could say that it's worse in some ways because there is that betrayal. But in terms of the impact, I'm going to keep coming back to this. In terms of the impact, that doesn't play a significant factor in the way that we are impacted. As I said, whether it's how you feel about yourself, your ability to trust other people, setting boundaries, maybe being too rigid or have none, shame, the level of responsibility that we feel, all of that is the same. It truly is. So whatever your experience is, whoever your abuser was, however many times it happened, whether you had one abuser or far too many to count, yes, all of those things can add layers. But the long-term impact is very, very similar. There's nothing wrong with you. Share your experiences, share your thoughts, your reflections, your reactions. I'd love to connect with you in the comments. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, and be sure to click on the little bell to get the notifications when I share a new video. If you've got a question that you'd like me to answer on anything related to mental health, my expertise is in childhood trauma, impact, and healing, please send it to qanda@courageousjourneys.com. I will share that link in the description. So thank you for joining me. If you're new to me, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. And if you're not new to me, thank you for sticking around. Thank you for being a part of this incredible Courageous Journeys community. I'll look forward to connecting with you again very soon. Have a beautiful day.